All right, I think we might get started. Hello, everyone. Mahaba. Buenas noches. I'm Riel McKeever. I'm your host for today's panel discussion. I'm a clinical psychologist in Australia and a co-founder of the Australia-Palestine Mental Health Network. I want to thank you so much for your interest and attendance at our network's first ever live event. When I had the initial idea for this event, my grounding thought was that we are all born into stories. They are of clinical importance, critical importance, really, for the children of genocide, displacement, and violence. They're a means for collective healing, empowering voices, cultural resistance, and in the case of Palestinians, the practice of being in Sumud. As children take on new roles as a result of systemic violence, they have new responsibilities to be these story keepers, to keep stories about their experiences, their family, their neighborhood, and their culture. It is our responsibility to listen and witness these stories. I'm really excited to be a part of such an important discussion today and having an audience attending from all over the world. I think it really highlights just how valuable this topic is across languages and cultures. With that in mind, we have organized live interpretation in Arabic and Spanish for today's webinar event. There are instructions in the chat of how to access this using Zoom. There are also live closed captions in Arabic and Spanish using a secondary window provided by Interprify. The instructions for accessing this are also in the chat. The event is being recorded in English, Arabic, and Spanish. Recordings will be, oh, sorry, my apologies. We have just had a technical issue. I just realized we are not recording. Let me start again.
Recording in progress.
There we are. Thank you for your patience. Recordings will be emailed to anyone who registered for the event, as well as through our associated Substack account. I'd like you to please use the chat for any technical questions or issues accessing the interpretation. To start, in setting the frame for our discussion today, it is really important to center Indigenous voices and experiences of storytelling, the continuous knowledge sharing and resistance to colonial harm. I would like to acknowledge the Yagara and Turrbal peoples. They are the First Nation traditional owners of the land in which I'm sitting here hosting this event. I pay respects to the elders, past and present, and acknowledge the young leaders who are working beside their elders to continue the stories of the Dreamtime. I also recognize all First Nations peoples across the globe as the original storytellers and acknowledge the important role that they continue to play in our community. Just a bit of orientation for today's panel discussion. The schedule for our discussion is that we will hear from each of the four panelists individually first. Then we will invite questions from the audience. In planning today's event, it was decided to use the Zoom meeting format, and this was intentional. We really wanted to encourage a more communal space for discussion and audience interaction. Can I please ask that audience members keep their microphone on mute? The panel schedule is going to allow for plenty of time for audience questions. So please use the raise hand feature when we open up to the audience questions to let me know if you'd like to ask your question. I will invite you to unmute yourself to ask your question to the panel when it is your turn. Please feel free to also write any questions for the panel in the chat if that's something you prefer, and I will ask your question to the panel on your behalf. So we've got, I think, quite a lot of people already joining us. Let's get into it. We're going to hear about the work of our four panelists and their experiences with storytelling. From cultural storytelling traditions and children's literature to trauma-informed practice and community voice, our panelists will draw from their professional experiences to explore how stories can be a tool for healing, resilience, and identity, and importantly, resistance to the erasure of voices in the context of war and displacement. So I'd like to welcome our first speaker. We begin with Dima Al-Alami, whose work centers on reclaiming voice and preserving lived experience. Dima reminds us that storytelling is not a luxury. It is how people ensure their histories are told truthfully and not erased. Thank you so much, Dima.
Thank you so much for having me. Hi, everyone. Marhaba jami'an. I am so excited to be here and so honored to be amongst the incredible panelists as well. I'm going to share a screen and let's see if it works because we did test it. Okay. So just a quick introduction to who I am. My name is Dima Al-Alami. My father is Palestinian. He was born actually in Jordan in 49. And my mom is Iraqi, so I'm half Palestinian, half Iraqi by blood. I grew up in Jordan all my life. And then I studied in Lebanon, which holds a very special place in my heart. And I've been in the UAE for the past 10 years. So I say I'm 100% Arab through and through. There's no discussion about it. And I'm extremely proud of my culture and where I come from. I was privileged enough to study in a private school in Jordan. So I'm also very proud to be bilingual. However, I am not very good. I wouldn't say I'm a native English speaker. And unfortunately, I am not also a native Arabic speaker. And we're going to touch upon that later on. I've worked in education for the past 16 plus years. I did my bachelor's in education and my master's in education in London as well. And I love reading and I love advocating for reading. I started a page where I was encouraging families, specifically Arab families, to read with their kids. But there's one thing that I didn't mention about myself, which is I'm an author, because actually, if you think of it, I'm really not. I never took a creative writing course. I'm good in writing. I express my thoughts, but I have a lot of grammatical mistakes, punctuation, spelling mistakes. If you follow my page, you will see them very often on my page. However, because of experience and life, I learned that there's nothing more important than speaking up. Now, I don't think I'm the best person to speak about that or the importance of using our voice and telling our stories, but absolutely, Professor Allah Yarhamo Rifat Al-Arir is. So I'm just going to take 2 minutes of your time to listen to what Ustaz Rifat said, Allah Yarhamo, and we will continue. Give me 1 second.
Telling us stories about Palestine. How many of you, have you ever been to Jerusalem? Raise your hand if you've ever been to Jerusalem. Like, we have 60 students here. We have 1, 2, probably 3. That's very few of you. Never been to Jerusalem. We're Palestinians. We're living in Gaza. We can't go to Jerusalem because of the Israeli occupation. But we love Jerusalem, right? We love Jerusalem because of what it means to us. We've never been there. But believe me, when you go there, you will feel that you've been there hundreds of times because you read about Jerusalem in literature, in story. It doesn't mean that khalas, we should take Jerusalem in the poem or in the story and that's it. No. But in literature, Jerusalem comes back to us. It's true that there is suffering, there is pain, there's occupation, and that's why Tamim al-Barghouti, as a Palestinian poet, as a young Palestinian poet, I think is doing a great service to the Palestinian cause and the Palestinian struggle. When you read Tamim or you listen to him reciting his poem from Quds or other poems, he brings you a lot. He takes you to Jerusalem. You live Jerusalem. He takes you back to it. You liberate it for just a little bit of time. And if there is hope, if you can imagine a free Palestine, free Jerusalem, probably you will work towards that. And the same thing applies to occupied Palestine. We've never been to other parts of Palestine because of the Israeli occupation, but we've been told so many times by our parents and grandparents, especially our mothers. They've been telling us stories about PalestineMHN in the past, the good old days, how Palestine was, all nice and beautiful, unoccupied, unraped. And therefore, I say, in this case, how our homeland turns into a story. In reality, we can't have it. We don't have it. But it can turn into poems, into poetry, into literature, into stories. So our homeland turns into a story. We love our homeland because of the story. We love our homeland because of the story. And we love the story because it's about our homeland. And this connection is significant. Israel wants to sever this relationship, for example, between Palestinians and land, Palestinian and Jerusalem and other places and cities. And literature attaches us back, connects us strongly to Palestine.
So who knows the Professor Rifat Al-Arir? Anyone knows? Just put your hand up. Amazing. And did any of you here ever attempted to write a story, to publish something? Do we have any publishers, any published authors? Okay, good. So this is going to change. If there's one takeaway from today, is that every single one of us is a storyteller, and every single one of us has a story to tell. So as I mentioned, I have not studied creative writing or writing in general, but I always felt that there's something I wanted to speak about. The first story I ever wrote was called This Is My Body, Don't Touch Me in Arabic. It's about an experience that I had. I used to refuse to speak about it, but I recently did a TED Talk, so now I'm comfortable. But unfortunately, I was sexually assaulted or abused when I was a child by a cousin. And I wanted to write a story about sexual abuse after I had my boys. And I finally did. And I wanted to do it in Arabic because this is something that was lacking in the Arab culture or whatever, in the Arab books. But as I was writing that book, something happened in Gaza again. Another war in Gaza happened. And that was in 2021, I believe, 2021. And I co-authored a book called From a Country Called Palestine. And it was also in Arabic because I'm a big advocate of speaking in Arabic, reading in Arabic, writing in Arabic. And we wrote this incredible book. And as I was writing it, it was a children's book. All I could think of was my teta and the stories that she told us about Palestine. And all I could think of was the pain that I had. I grew up, imagining myself, throwing eggs. I don't know why it was always eggs at occupation forces. I always had these very negative, heavy feelings towards Palestine. And that's something I did not want for my boys. What I wanted for my boys is for them to fall in love with Palestine first, and then learn and inshallah be able to liberate it and fight for it and do whatever it takes to see a free Palestine. Because I wanted the starting point not to be fear, not to be anything negative, but actually full of love. And this is where the book Min Balad Isma Palestine came out to be, or From a Country Called Palestine. It's a beautiful book that has no mention of the occupation. It just talks about the food, the dress, the culture, the trees, the beauty of Palestine. But these things changed. And I'm going to encourage you all. Who knows Chimamanda Ngozi, the Nigerian author? Put your hands up if you know her. If you don't, please, yes, I agree with Alice. She's giving me the heart shape. I 100% agree that she is one of the most incredible voices that speak about the importance of storytelling. And if there is one thing I can ask you to do is watch her TED Talk, which is called The Danger of a Single Story. If you only watch the first 2 minutes of that TED Talk, you will run to your desks and start writing your stories. I'm not going to take a lot from your time. But I wanted to talk to you about my journey with writing for Palestine. And Riyal, please tell me when I have 2 minutes left so that I don't drag on. Does anyone recognize this Hajjah? I'm going to make it bigger. Anyone remembers Hajjah Hadia on the left? So during the genocide on Gaza, Hajjah Hadia appeared on Saleh Ja'farawi's, Allah yarhamuh's, Instagram. He went to one of these hospitals when there was an attack, some bombing, and he found this Hajjah. And Hajjah Hadia came to the hospital with 2 things only. Who can guess in the chat what she brought with her to the hospital? She was injured, so she had a scar on her face and her arm was broken. Who can guess what she brought with her? Any guesses, random guesses, so that I don't spend my time lecturing you. Just try to send out on the chat what you think Hajjah Hadia brought with her to the hospital. So if there are no guesses, I will tell you what she got. She got a key. Interesting. Actually, no, she did not get a key. Okay, deed to her house. So she got 2 things. She got a picture of the mud oven that she used to bake her bread every morning in, and she got her ID, where it says that she was born in Tul Karim in 1944. So when this reporter, Allah yarhamu Salih Ja'farawi, went to her to see, where are you? Like, who are you? What's your name? She gave him his ID and he recognized, he's like, oh my God, you're older than the occupation, you know? And she started saying, with a smile on her face, with her beautiful green eyes, looking at him, and to some extent, you know, flirting with him and teasing him. And I was sitting in Dubai in the comfort of my own home, feeling completely depressed, unable to do anything, unable to be a mother, a professional, a wife, you know, completely depressed by what was happening in life. And I saw this Hajjah who was exiled to Gaza from Tul Karim, who was kicked out of her home. And unfortunately, on December 6th, 2023, she was executed by a sniper, because as an old lady, she always went outside, had her tea on her little chair, and she was executed there. But before, Allah yarhamha, that happened to her, she was in the hospital injured, knowing that she's going to get exiled again, with a smile on her face, with so much love for her land, with so much conviction that no one's going to take her home away from her, and with so much, you know, such ability to express her love to the land. And this is when I decided that, okay, you know what, Dima, you cannot sit and do nothing about this. I decided to write the book, 48 Stories of Exile from Palestine. And this is one of my proudest projects, because 100% of the proceeds from this book, so every single person who worked on this book, which is 4 editors, 18 proofreaders, 48 contributing authors, graphic designer, every single person, even the printing, was done pro bono. And I was able to gift the first 4,000 copies, first edition books, to the Palestinian Children's Relief Fund. And alhamdulillah, we collected $200,000, which are now in a fund for almost 80 Palestinian orphan children in Gaza, and it will support them for a full year. This book is a collection of stories from parents, grandparents, great grandchildren of those who were exiled from 48 until this day. And I have never written a 30,000 word book in English. I don't think my English is perfect enough. I most certainly never self-published. My previous 2 books were published through a big publishing house in Jordan, so I never self-published, but I did. And this book ended up in the US, in Australia, in Ireland, in Japan, in Malaysia, in almost every country around the world. And the most important thing, it was able to positively impact Palestinians in Gaza now. This is all to say that you have a living example in front of you right now, and I'm telling you that I have never studied how to write, but there's always a way. And if you genuinely believe that your story is worth telling, and if it's not your story, it's your grandparents' story, and if it's not their story, it's someone else's story, do it. Find the resources. One of the things that came out of all of this experience is I created a program called From Mother to Author. It's not only for mothers, but my community is primarily mothers, but it's supporting mothers who have ideas and want to turn those ideas into best-selling children's books or books in general. So if you have a story, please go ahead, start writing. It doesn't have to be perfect. You'll always find the right people to support you when it comes to language, which is usually what terrifies people about publishing. And yeah, because I always say this, I think every single one of us was born a storyteller. As kids, we start talking and blabbing before we start writing. And one of the things that we absolutely enjoy the most in life is actually sitting with our aunts, our mothers, our grandmothers, and listening to their stories. This is the most beautiful, I feel like one of the purest forms of love. And if we can do that and expand it beyond our immediate family and community, then we all should. So this is it from me.
Dima, thank you so much. I really appreciate seeing this book. I've actually already had a copy ordered, and so I'm really excited to see those stories. I think it just has such a wonderful way of bringing community together, and the way that it pays forward and continues to encourage everyone to have a voice. I love that. The next person we're going to hear from is Alice Youssef. who brings a really deeply thoughtful lens to storytelling as a cultural and ethical practice. Her work explores how stories carry memory, they shape identity, and create a space to hold even the most difficult realities with care. I'd like you to welcome Alice as our next speaker. Thank you.
Thank you, Riel, and everyone. I'm really happy and excited to be here, and it's really an honor to be among distinguished panelists as well. I'll be sharing my screen, and please, just like Dima said, if you need me to stop at any certain point, please let me know. I'm trying to be wary of time because I don't want to spill over and have the other panelists be able to express themselves. So I'll start from where Dima ended, because both of us have completely different tracks to where we got in life. I just will introduce myself. My name is Alice. I am by practice, I'm an interpreter and a translator, but I have a background in literature, culture, and creative writing. I did my degree in creative writing in the UK, and I was part of the Iowa International Residency Program in the US a couple of years ago. So I really enjoy writing a lot. I've had a lot of bits and pieces in poetry and in translation, and also a lot of prose published in different areas. But I really enjoy writing for children, which is really interesting because I haven't been published yet for children. But we will be touching upon a little bit of that in a while. I've also worked as a publisher myself during my previous work experience, being a translator. I was working for the Tamer Institute for Community Education, which is a great place that does one of the few remaining children publishing houses in Palestine. So I was heading the publishing unit for almost 3 years, where I was overseeing all of the production of children's books. So I'm still a little bit of big part of the world of writing for children. And that was a really life-changing experience for me. How I came into writing and how I came into working with children actually starts from my childhood. I grew up in Jerusalem, and the first time I actually and thank God that was the first and the last time I've ever witnessed war was when I was 12 years old, and it was the Second Palestinian Intifada. It was something that at the time I was 12 years old, so I couldn't really, I'm navigating the world between being a child and starting to transition into teenagehood and then adulthood. I never thought it would actually affect me this much until you pass through a lot of experiences as a child, and then when you get out of those experiences, you don't realize how much they've really affected your growth and your interests in a lot of areas and in a lot of things. So I really started moving on from that when I found my calling to be a writer and a language person, to be very aware of language and how we approach things and what different topics and areas that we look on in generally when we're writing. So I started focusing more about war, trauma, children under war, children who've lived these kind of experiences, and writing for that sphere of or category, if we can say, of kids. And I always call Palestine a living archive because it is kind of archival, but it's still very much a living space as well. So I wanted to just start with something that I want to begin with a simple but urgent idea that storytelling, as much of it as it is a craft and practice, and where I encourage and I take Dima's call forward. If you really feel like you're called to do it, just do it. There are parts of the craft that has tons of other people who are there to support you. For instance, I'm not an native English speaker, but I'm an L2 writer, which means I write in the language that's not my first language, which is Arabic. So I write in English. Because of reachability and because of my career, it's helped me reach different places, but there's always editors, there's always writers, there are always other people who would support you, hone your craft and make it better. But when I look into children and storytelling, I always realize that storytelling for children, it is never neutral. It was never, ever neutral, because it looks at reclaiming your voice beyond the immediate reality. If you look at the reality of Palestine and a lot of other places, which has also influenced my reading as well, because I'm a voracious reader of different contexts, and I like to read about things that are similar to my background. There's always a context that's marked by restriction, conflict, and upheaval, but then the narrative response towards that reshapes your memories and creates alternative possibilities. Now, why did I start by speaking about me witnessing the second Intifada? That was really pivotal for me, because during that time, while I was navigating it, I was getting my way out of there through reading. I wasn't getting my way out of the darkest moments, wasn't it, for the books. And when you look at the storytelling as a way for children specifically, it will never be neutral for several reasons. In contexts like Palestine, it becomes a cultural practice for survival, imagination, and meaning making. It helps you shape the world around you, and it is a deeply ethical act, because as consciously aware writers, what we choose to tell children and how we tell it shapes how they understand themselves and the whole world. Like, I speak from my experience as also literary translator, writer, and someone who has worked closely as well with the youth public library reading engagements and all engagement program. When we look at Palestine and storytelling as a cultural practice, I always realize that it is rooted in listening. When we look at things, as Dima mentioned, the Arab culture in general, and I think not just the Arab culture, cultures everywhere started with speech first rather than the written word. So it's always passed on as an oral tradition. So I always look at it from the lens of, you have to listen and gather the information, the concerns, let it settle, brew it. When you look at the narrative, it doesn't have to always be linear, and you can let it breathe. In Palestine, storytelling is not separate from life. It is embedded in it, and it exists in, as Dima mentioned, in the traditions, in the family memories, in the political rupture, and in everyday language. They're passed on not only through books, but through the different fragments, the images, the silences, the gestures, the inherited memories. You inherit what your grandma, what your teta has told you, what your great grandmother, great grandfather, and there are different tools specifically for Palestine that help you navigate that ethically when you're dealing with very heavy things like war, death, loss, and you still want to preserve humanity. There's a lot of metaphor in Palestinian literature. There's a lot of symbolism in Palestinian literature. There's a lot of fragmentation of space, of place, of ideas. And generally, you go for non-linear sides of it. But what interests me most is how fiction becomes a space where what is fragmented as a reality can be reassembled differently to escape this reality and to reimagine how we can be held within it. Because it's important in contexts of violence and instability, where language itself, because I come from a linguistic point of view, is often under colonization and pressure, and the tool that is used. So storytelling becomes a way of reclaiming your voice and the voices of others and carrying it forward, resisting that erasure and looking for a land that has not just history, but a lot of emotional complexity. With children's literature specifically and young adults, I look at things like, how can we, as adults, be able to tell the story without actually overburdening? How do we protect without silencing? And then when you look at the story from a reading perspective, you look at different levels, like the surface levels when you use everyday expression, and then the global authors, how did they target experiences like fragmentation, like loss, then I look regionally at Arab writers and boundaries and political expression within a younger audience. And then I look at the bedrock of the Palestinian tradition, which is oral traditions. But then you realize it's not just aesthetic. There is, especially if you're writing for children, some form of truth-telling and protection that you always have to balance, because at some point, it is also a space for them to enjoy, and it is a space for them to escape. So I'm always consciously aware of, do I want to overburden with very heavy themes? A second thing is, am I allowed, do I have enough agency to speak of other experiences that I have not lived myself but was able to witness? How much am I using someone else's experience to benefit the narrative itself? But when I look at this point of view, it is where I think of children's literature as a form of an ethical imagination. It's not just about simplifying reality, it's just also translating it into forms that for the children, it can be emotionally and intellectually able to they can emotionally and intellectually be able to inhabit. And that is something that I keep carrying across from my personal experience and my work with children. These are photos from 2 different programs that I've been working on for the past decade, more or less. The photos is on children reading engagement programs that I do within public libraries, where we, in an age that is advanced and full of tech and technology, encourage children to go back into the physical book. And we discuss the books. We choose books that are not always necessarily Palestinian, but sometimes coming out of the imagination and the depth of the global literature and the literature of the international scheme. And we get discussions on meanings, on vocab. So we deal with the book as an immersive experience for the child, and just an encouraging experience for them to be able to get shaped by the context. When you're living in so much uncertainty, collective fear and collective memory, it's not always just scary, but it's also something that gives you physical tools to be able to work with them. So these reading engagement programs are not only personally enriching for me, but it's a chance to encounter. And because you have a lot of children you're working with, it is really essential to make everyone heard. I think that is the power of storytelling, to make someone's voices heard. And this is why I come into this little bit of brown that you're seeing on the screen. I think Khader, my colleague, might be able to mention this at a later stage. I was invited earlier last year to work on this new program, which is called يوم جديد على الموجة أحلى حكاية, which roughly translates to a new day. You listen to the story via waves. It was basically waves, meaning radio waves. It was a program that was designed to help facilitate, in the context of genocide and in Gaza, having all of the lack of education and the erasure of the school system, to have something for alternative education through storytelling and through writing, which was brilliant, because this was a series of 90 episodes, radio episodes, that were broadcasted not only on the main, one of the biggest basically radio stations in Palestine that broadcasts across all of Palestine, was also recorded and set in Jordan. It was accompanied, every episode would deal with a set of characters. So as writers, we received a set of different characters and their traits to be able to work them throughout the text. And you'd pick up a concept, scientific, artistic, any sort of context and theme that you wanted to work with, and weave a story that moves the character around it, using another story, whether from a local tradition or from a global literature, to connect it to the concept so you can break it down to the children. This program is brilliant because it was also accompanied by a lot of worksheets for instructors and for teachers to be able to advance whatever concept you've worked on, and to be able to give it to the students and break it down. For me, that was very powerful, because also as writers, we were given the space to be able to choose our own topics. Obviously, if it was duplicated or someone else had taken it, you would have been advised to change the program. But personally, for me, I felt like that was my way of giving back, and giving back ethically. And because I wanted to challenge myself, one of the most difficult episodes, I wrote 3 episodes, by the way, one of the most difficult episodes I had to write was on unexploded ordnance. And that was extremely difficult and extremely challenging for me, to be able to speak about something that heavy and to break down such a big concept into a small thing that is understandable for a child, and not break basically make it sound stupid or stay within the ethical backgrounds of it. But how I got to this was because as a child, I would be always weary of things around me. And I called my episode that would speak about things that were explosives, basically, that looked like toys. Like, are you out of toys, basically? So I started to take it from that sort of perspective, where I rethought of my relationship with the young readers as my audience, because it wouldn't just, there are 2 difficult paradigms when you look at it from a technical point of view. Like, I didn't want to be from the instructive point of view, but I looked at writing the texts from a companionship point of view, and that narrows down and takes off the pressure on you as a writer, and allows you necessary space for silence and for breathing. Because another theme in my work and in the work of many of the Palestinian authors writing for children centers around the role of storytelling in shaping identity, and not just dealing with difficult things, also shaping how we preserve cultural memory, how we self-recognize, and how we do quiet resistance through preserving dignity and sharing humanity amongst a context that is the occupation, which is not really similar to any experience on Earth, pretty much. But it's not only about, like, here we are very careful. It's not only about prescribing identity. It's opening a space for children to see themselves as part of something larger, as placing Palestine in a space where you connect to a larger community of things that they can relate to, because that is a lived experience elsewhere, or that mirrors something inside of them. And my approach, as I've mentioned earlier, starts with listening, because you start with listening, you end with listening as well. You're able to pick up on the silence as much as you are able to pick up on the speech. And that's especially important when you're dealing with things like war and loss, because the question is not how you represent suffering directly, but how you hold it as well inside of you without flattening it or over flattering it. For me, fiction has always been a space where dignity, complexity, and emotional truths can and are able to manifest themselves. Working with young readers matters because it's not secondary work. It is foundational cultural work. A lot of people assume because they are children, you have to dumb things down. And as I've mentioned, it's just not. Reading and writing does not only shape the readers, but also leaves them as thinkers and as storytellers. It gives them stories that do not overwhelm, but also does not shut down their imagination, because the challenge is always balance, I think, with the ethical, between truth and tenderness, between reality and possibility, and between witnessing and imagining. That's why we craft witnesses, like narratives that are open doors to different ways of feelings and understanding, navigating complex emotion without diminishing the sense of wonder, which is extremely important for children when we're dealing with them. Because I believe that stories and writing is radical work. As much as we like to think about it and to influence it, it is radical work. It expands you beyond your space, your physical space, and it also anchors you within your space. For me, telling is listening, is creating. And that's why storytelling is not about what we say. I think it's about what we are able to make possible for others to feel and to think and to imagine. In Palestine, and in a context that is marked by complexity and uncertainty, storytelling with children becomes a form of quiet resistance, if we must say, but also a space for care, a lot of care. Stories can open doors. If you hold a child without overwhelming them, language can offer you a space for silence and speech. It can help you sense your way of belonging, which is grounded. So I always think when we work with stories as writers, as educators, or illustrators, as translators, whatever capacity, even as family members, let us take children seriously with their complexities and let's listen. Because when we create stories that do not simplify the world, they accompany children with the world, they grow in them. And if I end here, I always remember from my childhood, basically the stories of the different folk tales, the different little places where everyone was able and enriches that the child to be able to think that they can and they are able to do something. And that is how I actually grew into reading as a reader, as later on in life, by reading the little foundations that were able to set me up, where I could see that there were different characters that were able to overcome not only the difficult, but also the hilarious, the comedic. Like I always remember reading Pippi Longstocking, Alice in Wonderland, the sense of these different characters where everything was turned upside down and still the characters were able to navigate their way out of it. For me, storytelling is a way of shedding hope and giving light. And that's the most important thing that you can take forward with your work. And that is one of the things I've learned by being a publisher, that even when we work with hard texts and very difficult texts, and as a publisher and then an assistant to the publisher, we needed to look at what works for publishing and what doesn't work as an industry insider. And the primary reason, and I can tell you this is not a secret, the primary care that was given was, does this text work and is it fun to read? We were never consciously aware of if it will be sensitive, or it will take part where it is like politically anger someone. So it was always a challenge for you when you're into publishing to see, is it working? Is it resonating with children? And I think that is where the power of literature lies, because whatever we've learned as children, we carry on with us through our lives, and we take forward to the next generation and the next generation and the next generation. And it all technically starts with the word. That's the first thing we master, is speech. And then that's also one of the things that we master while going forward in life. So along with what Dima has said, if you find a calling for you, and if you find like you're able to ethically speak about it, no matter how difficult it is, the tool will always appear. Thank you.
Oh, that's just wonderful, Alice. Thank you so much. I really think that you've drawn some wonderful ways of looking at not just these binaries or dualities, but this flow and the way of starting in these one parts, but how it continues and generates the anchoring and the moving. I really love that. I think that works really well into our third speaker, Dr. Asmahan Saleh Khalil. She approaches storytelling through a psychological and trauma-informed lens. She will explore how stories can help children rebuild their internal worlds, restoring a sense of safety, meaning, and resilience. Thank you so much, and welcome, Asmahan.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. Thank you, Alice and Dima. I could listen to you forever. And I really see how all of this weaves so beautifully together. And I hope my part, I mean, I usually tend to dump everything on slides, and then I'll skip through it as I'm making space for time. And there are things that Dima and Alice covered beautifully well, so you might see me skipping quickly. But so my name is Asmahan. I'm joining you from the UAE. I am originally from the south of Lebanon. It's a land that also knows very intimately what it means to live under the weight of occupation, displacement, and a lot of loss. And also, you know, I've learned from all of this. I think all of us have, you know, a lot of us here have shifted their work and shifted their perspective and had a whole existential crisis recently. And I've really learned personally what it means to resist through memory and through storytelling and through community, which was not something that I grew up reflecting upon as much as I have in the recent years. I've had the privilege through my work. So I am child psychologist and an adjunct professor at the university. And through my work with children directly, so I work with a lot of children that have undergone trauma and abuse. And I've also supported parents and professionals that are working with children in Gaza and in the south of Lebanon through narrative therapy, right? And this is the part that I'm going to be bringing in. And really, we've learned resilience from them, from the children, from the work that has been done with them. In Arabic, the word for it is sumud, steadfastness. And this is just a word that just is always coming back to my head. And hopefully today I'll get to show you how storytelling is at the heart of the psychological practice of sumud and is at the heart of healing. You know, as we all just, you know, before I get into the heart of this, I feel like we all stand very firmly against genocide and the silencing of voices. And I'm really, really very honored just to have the chance to share what I've learned about narrative exposure therapy, about working with children, about putting children at the heart. So Dima was saying that, you know, we're the way that we put together the voices is very important, and she was really encouraging everyone to do it. And Alice was talking about, you know, writing for children, and I'm going to add on to that how we're taking the writing from the children, using their voices, and then giving it back to them in a way that will help them reframe their experiences. So at the heart of it, I think what I've seen from my perspective is genocide being a war on someone's individual story and the story of their community, right? So what we see it affecting is you know, we were saying earlier with, I think it was Dima or Alice, that we're talking about how our homeland becomes our story, right? And how stories about the homeland, we find ourselves in them. And this is so important. And I'll take it so far as to say that we build a story of who we are based on the stories of our homeland, right? And the story of who we are becomes also a medicine, a way that we heal, a way that we recalibrate after that has been affected. Because genocide is a war on the story of our homeland, on the story of our community, and the story of who we are as people. And if we really want to resist that, we have to first start by reminding ourselves as in a way that is as raw as possible of who we are, right? And words, as Alice was saying, are a wonderful way to do that. So one of the things that we've seen children start to doubt is the story of the self, right? Who am I? It's very difficult to try to see who you are beyond the trauma that has happened or beyond what you are currently going through. Who is my family? Who held me? Who was lost? Who remains, right? What role do they play? Where do I belong? If my home is gone, if my land is gone, if it was taken away from me, where do I belong? How does this place exist? Does it exist only in my memory? And where are we going? Is there a tomorrow? What's going to happen to me? So this is what becomes fragmented as a result of what we're going through. And if we're looking at Western stories, if I dare call them that, right? The stories that we kind of grew up in without even acknowledging that they're setting our understanding of the world, and we look at the just world hypothesis. You know, think of any story that you remember from your childhood, and you would see how it's the good guys that are always winning, right? As soon as the story is over, it's more of a hero story, and you get to experience that, and you get to experience this moment where, you know, the bad guy is being punished for what he's doing, and the children that we're working with are currently not able to experience that. And they have been told, they have been promised through these stories that this is what will happen, right? And this is something that we've heard directly from children more than once. If good things happen to good people, where do I stand in all of this? Why is this happening to me? I'm not a bad person. Why are all these bad things happening? This is one of the more heartbreaking things to work on as a therapist, because you really have to go back to their understanding of what good person means and what good things means, and really trying to give them a sense of meaning beyond what they have heard all of their lives. And children, you know, what they do with these words is that they compartmentalize, right? They put them into boxes. And they have a box for good and a box for evil. And the good things happens, and the bad things happens. And then this is all shaken up. Right. So for a child whose home was bombed, whose family was killed, who lost a lot of people, this framework, this Western framework of the story does not always heal. Right. Often it has been accusatory. And the thing that I want to say here is that we often don't know this unless we ask the child. We wouldn't have gotten this quote. We wouldn't have heard this from the children if we weren't talking about storytelling, if we weren't asking them to put together their story, and we had to dig deep. So imagine a lot of the people that grew up or they're currently going through their childhood without this. And this is where storytelling comes in to heal, right? What's happening internally in terms of the brain and the nervous system and the memory, when we experience a trauma, when we experience such significant trauma, the first thing that gets impacted is the nervous system. Our threat response is activated, and it becomes activated for an extended amount of time. So we find children are hypervigilant, they feel unsafe, their amygdala is activated, and this is a part of the brain that is meant to be active. It's helpful if it's activated for a short amount of time, but then when it's extended, it starts to have physiological and psychological effects. The prefrontal cortex is online, and that's the part that is responsible for problem solving and analyzing and higher level thinking. Memory is also impacted. So experiences are usually stored in smaller moments and sensations. And memory is also a big victim. The way that we remember, we tend to remember the state that we're in above any other memory of safety. and agency, how much of an effect I have on the world around me. So the child here becomes an object of an event, a victim of this event, and the agency that they have over their own life, over their own story, is directly impacted, right? So we need to think that the body is always paying attention, the body is always alert, and that can have layered effects across many parts. And you know, we try to avoid words like, you know, you're safe now. We can't say that. Or calm down, or it's okay, it's going to be okay, there's nothing to be afraid of. We lose, as therapists or as social workers that are working with these children, I can't tell them to say that, right? Or we can't use that type of language where we're saying, oh, it's okay, you're going to be fine. And this is where, again, this is where we will add on to the importance of the story and how we're rewriting it. One thing that we do try to do in this situation is we get the child to talk, and we get the child to express, and we get them to have what we called a sense of felt safety, even if it is in just the current moment, not looking too much ahead, but really we're trying to restore the immediacy of the safety that they're feeling. Okay, what you need is one safe moment right now for you to be able to process what's happening and to carry that forward. There's three things that we're looking at when we're talking about technique in terms of using storytelling or narrative exposure therapy, or, you know, depending on your area of expertise, you might call it different things, but it's just storytelling as a form of therapy. We look at narrative agency. We're trying to turn the child from a passive recipient of all of the events into an active author. And Alice touched beautifully upon that, so I'm going to skip over it, but it's really that transformation from someone who is receiving to someone who is authoring, who is writing, who is restoring their agency. We use a lot of metaphors. And that's the cultural toolkit. This is where it comes in. Metaphors make things relatable. Metaphors kind of piggyback off of existing conceptions of things that are positive or negative, and we're using that to help the child explain and explain back to the child concepts that might be overwhelming otherwise, and narrative reprocessing. So we're taking these fragmented memories that we said earlier were you know, impacted, and we're creating a coherent story, a beginning, a middle, and an end that serves the child, serves its purpose, and serves the larger community. It looks practically, this is what it looks like. And I really encourage anyone who is in contact with children, who has children, this could range from a fun experiment to do with a child to something really impactful that can go beyond healing one child and can really reach out to the wider community. So we really start with a very clear beginning, trying to name what was before the event, before the incident that the child is remembering so greatly, trying to give the child sense of their world pre-trauma, right? And to tell them that this person was real, these memories were real, the wisdom that you've gotten from, you know, your grandma that you lost and you love so dearly, it's real and it's still there, right? It's still there in your memory, and now we're going to put it down into writing. We ask them things like, tell me about your room, right? The one that you had before. What colors were the walls? What do you remember from it? There was a teddy bear there. It was yellow. My mother painted it yellow. There was a sticker above my bed, right? My grandmother used to give me these stuffed toys and I put them there. And we really remind them that everything you have in your memory existed, right? And it's something that you can carry forward. Because as we said before, memory is a primary victim of all of this. And then a truthful middle, validating the experience. Although this could be harder when it's the parents that we're directing to do this, but when it's the social workers or when it's the therapists, it becomes a bit easier because you hold a neutral stance and you're able to ask, tell me what happened. What do you remember from what happened? How did it feel like, right? And adding a lot of validation, not trying to erase it, right? Sometimes the children get overwhelmed. We go back to the safe space and then we revisit it when we can. But we really hold the truth of it and the weight of it in a space where the child can share it. Okay, and then a hopeful horizon. It's not a happily ever after just yet, but fingers crossed. but a hopeful horizon. We're trying to restore the idea that this is continuous, this is ongoing, and there is a future that we are trying to build together. The story is still being written, is basically what I want the children to understand from all of this. And this is arguably the one that takes the most effort, because we're not building it on memories that exist or memories of an incident that has happened, but we're trying to look to the future. And this is where I would say 50% is of the work is at this step. Okay, what would you do? What do you want to? How do you want to continue? Asking questions about who they want to be when they grow up, right? If you could say something to your future self, right? So that's giving them an idea of their future self and of them having a conversation with their future. What would you want your future self to remember from what you had now? I would want my future self, you know, one girl, you know, she's saying, I would want my future self to remember my sister, right? I want to remember my sister. I don't want to forget her. I don't want the 20-year-old me to forget that my sister was there. Great. Now this is what we're going to look forward to. We're going to look forward to a way to commemorate your sister and the role that she had. And, you know, sometimes they say, I don't know yet. And we're responding with, that's the right answer, right? We don't know, because you're still becoming. And I'm so, you know, I'm supportive of that idea that it can be very confusing, right? And I'm here with you, but the story hasn't finished. You're writing it now. This is ultimately the third step that we're trying to build when we're helping the child write their own story or really find their identity, okay? Essentially, for the therapists in the room, this is problem externalization, right? We're kind of diffusing from, you know, I am the trauma to the trauma is something that happened to a bigger person that I am, to my bigger story. It's one part, a very significant part of a bigger story. It's not who I am permanently. We're separating the incident, the ongoing trauma from the identity. You know, we give it a name. This is at the heart of what we're doing here. I'm just gonna skip over these just not to take so much time. This was already covered. Essentially what it is role reversal, right? We're letting the child hold the pen instead of them just being written about or told. You know, as my colleagues were just saying, you know, children are storytellers. Humans are storytellers, right? This has been a practice of communities for as long as communities existed, right? But now we're making sure that with the innocence and with the fresh experiences that children have, they are the authors, and the enemy exists in their story, in their narrative, but they exist on the child's own terms. I get to decide what happens to that enemy, and there is something very healing in that idea. That's why I wrote, it's not denial, it's mastery, because I'm not denying my truth, but it's giving me some sort of healing to talk about what I would do to that. What would I replace that bomb with? What would I do to that soldier? Right? And the body is learning that even if I cannot physically act in my mind, I can say the story the way I want to, and I can do with it what I want. And we use that. We really use that as a tool. Metaphors are very important, as Alice touched upon. I just wanted to say there's many nuances and exceptions, but generally I don't want to overstep. And, you know, especially as a therapist, I'm always keen and I'm always questioning, I'm always curious. What does the key mean to you? For most children, some of them might not be aware just yet. Some of them might be very aware and they might really hold it as a sense of pride, as an idea of continuity, but some of them might not. Some of them might relate to it more negatively because of a specific nuanced experience that happened with them. So I want to say metaphors are very important, and they are really a way to carry on culture, but there are some exceptions and nuances that we are often trying to be careful with. The general ones that I see in terms of themes that come up, the olive tree, trees in general. I don't know if there's any therapists here that are that would definitely be familiar with the tree of life exercise that we do with children, where we're trying to really get them to understand the roots, it's part of the tree, the stem, the fruits, and we're giving these different names to different parts of their identity, and this weaves beautifully into the Palestinian culture as well. The key, the jasmine as resilient beauty. So Alice touched upon that. I'm not going to go very much into it. The research has been very supportive of narrative therapy in terms of children either authoring their stories or using stories to see themselves and to reflect on themselves. There has been reduction in symptoms of trauma, of PTSD. There has been an increase in emotional regulation skills from the children, improvement in sense of control. And the studies that are coming out are always in favor of children having stronger cultural identity because of the stories that they're exposed to. So again, back to the calling of Dima, I really encourage as much as we can, especially if we're considering the nuances of the metaphors, the support of the research, and the importance that it has in healing. The more variety we have from different authors and different perspectives, the better it is that we will find the right fit for the right child. So as a person that uses stories and that creates them with children about themselves, I would love to see more of this out there in the world, and I would love to use it with the children that we work with. We're really trying to move beyond the Western trauma framework. This is something that I've learned a lot in terms of my education, but then I've had to unlearn, and I'm still in the process of unlearning because there's just no right fit, right? And for all of the clinicians here, this is the sacred part of our work, right? We're not just treating symptoms, we're not treating a diagnosis. We're literally rebirthing. This is what I see it when I'm creating a story with a child or with a group of children. I see it as a rebirth. I've often reflected on that with my colleagues, right? We're rebirthing their sense of self. You know, I see myself as a victim, as someone who will never get out of this. And now, you know what? Congratulations, there's a new self that has had the same experiences, but has a completely different meaning to it. We're creating that space for the children to author and not just to absorb and take in everything that was given to them. But we first have to do it. We have to reconsider what have we taken in and how we can play around with that. And we're essentially replacing the idea of, you know, what's wrong with this child with what has happened to this child and what has the child understood about what has happened to them, right? And this is how we honor their resilience and we go beyond pathology by focusing on our vocabulary, by looking at our metaphors and really enriching ourselves with the cultural tools. I don't claim to have all of the cultural tools that I need, but I do know that I am actively seeking and actively trying to unlearn and relearn what we would need. The community, for the community members here, you also play a very, very important role to our elders and to our community members, to the parents. You know, you are the intervention. Me and the colleagues that work with me, we don't have access to all of the children in the world, but elders and communities do, parents in communities do, social workers, if we all get together, you know, we all together make up the intervention that would help the child heal. And these stories are the medicine that we're using. And I would really give just a big call, you know, beyond the therapy room to everyone not to underestimate the healing power of sitting with someone and, you know, telling them, let me tell you about, right? And I say this to parents or to caretakers when they come to me with a case or with a child and this child and that child, and I say, just sit. If I were to give you something immediate, right, it would be just sit with them and tell them, let me tell you about. And that could be a person, that could be a place, that could be an event, an incident, a story that you've heard, someone that is inspirational, right? Sharing these stories with the children helps them be able to share their stories back in different ways. Yeah, I think this is it for me. I hope I didn't go too much over time or overstep my colleagues' time, but I'll leave you with these final words and a big, big thank you for holding this. Oh, I'll also leave some references. Sorry, but the academic in me had to do that. Barber has done wonderful work. The second one also includes Giacoman, which has done beautiful work as well. So it combines both authors, and these are just for anyone that's interested in the research, happy to take this conversation further.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Asmahan. I really appreciate what you shared. And I think the idea of children, holding the pen themselves, being the authors of their own stories is really important. And it leads really well to our final speaker, Khader Salameh, who is going to focus on the craft of storytelling for children and the power of imagination. His work is going to invite us to really consider how stories can open space for children, not just to understand their world, but to actively reshape it. So I welcome Khader here to share his thoughts on the topic for today.
I'm very glad to be here today. Thank you, Riel, for this wonderful opportunity. I'm Khader Salameh. I worked at Tamer Institute, like Alice, my colleague, for 2 years. I have a bachelor in English literature and master's in sociology. It's really going to be hard to add anything with everything my colleagues said, but I will try my best. To be honest, I don't have a specific model in writing. It starts with an idea, premonition that I start with, and it takes shape over time. I would just like to say that my nieces and nephews, who were my friends, especially when they were younger, they are the main source of inspiration, and I always go back to them to see if it works. And building on this idea, I really see that what's important is not the topic that we're going to deal with, but rather how to see it in the eyes of the child. So the most important thing to begin with is if you want to write for children or to engage with children, is to try to understand life through their eyes. And that makes things much easier later. So my approach is different each time. I have 3 published stories, one of which is called Sinosaur, which was published by Palestine Writing Workshop. It was before the genocide. It talks about a girl who dreams of having the biggest dinosaur in the world. So she draws a beetle and tells her father to make it bigger. Eventually, the father draws a big dinosaur. She takes it to school, and everybody sees it and say that's not the biggest one. We're not convinced. So what happens next is that her father comes up with an idea of drawing a dot on a paper and asks Lila, the protagonist, to water it. When she starts watering it, it gradually becomes a tree, grows into a tree. It becomes an orange tree, filling her room, and on a specific day, after taking much care of it, the beetle reappears, and she says, "I will take really good care of it until it becomes the biggest beetle in the world, like a dinosaur." So the idea began with something really simple, is of nurturing imagination, and I thought of it, of reflecting it, not in a direct way, but rather figuratively. And even though symbolically, but it has a simple meaning. This idea will be clear to children, and at the same time they will love it because they love the drawing. They have the relationship with their parents. They take care of of watering plants. So it's all of those elements came into the story to assert this idea of nurturing imagination and having to put effort into things until it becomes it becomes a reality. And in a way, it says that imagination can turn to reality in a way. The second story was about a dog named Dog. The dog gets lost. He goes out to bring a shoe for his owner. He loves it. He loves the idea of the shoe, so he gives him. He wants to give him a gift, and the owner gets mad at him. So the dog thinks that it's because he only brought one pair of shoes. So he goes back to get another one, and he gets lost. He finds himself in a gang, dog gang, and they follow cats. Their role is to follow cats. Even though he's a very sensitive and peaceful dog, he has to get a living. So he has to join the gang and follow their rules. Beginning with the first mission is of capturing a cat, a specific one. So he goes to capture it, and once he gets it in a corner, he looks it in the eye and says, "Don't worry, I'm just looking for a friend." And the cat does another signal, like hand gesture to show, and she says also the word friend. They don't understand each other, but they understand the word friend because it's a global word. They agree to search for their own owners, each one, and eventually, and that's the trick, is that they don't go back to their original owner. Even though visually the owner appears very close to where the dog and the cat are looking, but in reality, they never meet each other. Instead, the cat and the dog find a new owner. She was walking by and she sees them that very distressed and very lonely, and she takes them into her house. So this alternative ending, for me, I thought of it also in the beginning. It was an idea of having an alternative ending, because in life, in reality, we don't always get the good ending we want, but this doesn't mean that we get the bad ending. We could get another good ending, which might be not very satisfying or fulfilling as the first one, but life goes on. And the idea of life goes on is what made me write the story. It was through a cat and a dog looking for their owner, but that's the main idea that I worked on. So what I'm trying to say is that I don't have a clear model in the beginning, like I have a list of ingredients to put in the story. I like to be experimental, and I think this way I can truly forget my adult mind and get inside the mind of the child, so I can see his own way and feel his or her own way and feel things the way they do. And also imagine the world in a much less concrete and material and mundane as we grown-ups eventually do imagine it once we grow up. So everything could be played with, different perspective, different endings, different way of looking at things, because even now we all have the side of us that is still a child, and even though we have a certain kind of reality that we all agree to, but each one of us has his own concept of reality, and eventually we get used to things. And children, and on the other hand, it's not that we teach them, but they teach us that how to rethink things before we put them in a certain category or a model. So it's a way to also to expand or go beyond our usual boundaries to get back inside the mind of the child. The third story, which is going to be published with the Tamer Institute, is called The Cloud. I wrote it recently during the genocide, and it talks about a cloud in the sky. I want to mention here that my biggest inspiration in children literature is The Little Prince. I don't know how to pronounce the author. I think it's Exobri, but I grew up with it, and it really stuck in my mind, the story of The Little Prince. And I think it's for all ages, for adults and youth and everyone. So the story of the cloud is while there's a child watching the sky, and suddenly all the clouds that are sticking together, they split, leaving one cloud alone. This cloud seems very lonely and it's stuck in the sky. So the child feels the emotions and the turmoil of this cloud, and he jumps up to capture it. He calls for it, so it comes, and eventually he finds out that it's stuck above his head. When he's sad, it rains madly. When he's it always follows him, and it's always bothering him. So now it's stuck with him. One day he wakes up and he doesn't. He hears the cloud crying. It says that it wants to go back to its shepherd. So he invites it to live inside him for a while, so he can offer discomfort. So the cloud lives inside him, and when they cry together, they cry together and console each other. And when they're happy, they're really happy together, until this cloud feels peace. One day, this cloud comes out of the child, and she says, it says, I found the shepherd. I'm going to get back to it. Thank you so much for having me. So this story, of course, talks about war in the West in the best way possible I could imagine it. I'm not sure that it can offer it can be that much of help during the genocide, but that's what I truly felt that I could contribute. And the idea is that the word shattered the sky. The clouds all were torn apart, and each one of us has his own cloud above him. The child has now this cloud that he's responsible for. So if he rejects this cloud that's above him, it will keep raining. Not until he accepts it inside of him and he takes it and embraces it, until this gives him the idea of this gives him the necessary process of healing. So this was also a way to manifest how we should not reject our emotions, and we should welcome those emotions until they gradually go away. So that's basically my approach. I think of children literature as a way, above all, to engage children and give them new meanings and perspectives to look onto things. At the same time, of course, with everything we're living in, the difficulties, the occupation, the war that is happening, it's very vital for us to look at writing as resistance, but at the same time, like Alice said, it shouldn't be a burden. It should be organic. I believe that even when we talk about those heavy themes, we should also always consider the fact that it's a child and it wants to be entertained and it wants to be engaged, and the elements of the characters should be unique and entertaining. Once we get this, let's say, entry point, we can, of course, talk about the Palestinian context, our hardships organically. But it doesn't, I believe, this is my philosophy in writing, that it doesn't have to be forced. It doesn't have to be even intended. It can be in subtleties, like, for instance, it doesn't have to be in the words, in text. It could be in visually reflected by the illustrator. Many of my stories, the first one especially, it shows pictures on the wall of Jerusalem. It shows Palestinian houses. It shows characters that are have Palestinian features. So I think this is the way I see storytelling for children and of children as an act of resistance. It doesn't have to be resistance in terms of just politically, but rather as a way of looking at life, resistance to hard feelings, resistance to anything that might harm or try to conceal our identity. So this is resistance, and also a resistance to traditional way of thinking about things and being pedagogical in the way of storytelling, like having a beginning and conflict, and then an ending with a certain saying that encourages children to do something. It doesn't have to be like this. So all of those things, I think, as long as we experiment and as long as we keep thinking about things differently each time, this makes Palestinian child literature, and even globally, it makes children literature innovative without having a clear model, but at the same time making sure that always inventing and making sure that it's entertaining and it's helpful for children. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate hearing that, and the audience does too. There's lots of great feedback here in the chat. I think that leads us to a really important part of the discussion right now, which is really about opening questions to the audience. Before we do, though, just to sort of warm up the audience, I guess I wanted to reflect on what I've been hearing with these powerful messages from the panelists. I guess despite the different entry points, I've noticed myself that they really have presented a remarkably strong coherence of storytelling as resistance against erasure, and that this isn't optional. Yes, at a political and cultural level, but it's also at that existential level, that sense of identity, that sense of self, and that continuity. I really felt that for me, when I heard the panelists presenting about storytelling, it has that multi-layered practice that really simultaneously preserves culture, it repairs the psyche, activates agency, and reclaims voice. Particularly, I feel that from what we've heard today so far, that it's storytelling that shapes who a child believes they are and their place within the larger social and cultural narrative. That these stories are a bridge between the personal experience and the collective history. For children, this means that they're not only just the listeners, but they're also the authors, the interpreters, and the carriers of story. And that by holding their own narratives, this allows truth-telling and emotional safety. It provides that emotional processing, meaning making, and rebuilding of their internal world as well as their external world. And so I guess after my reflection, I would really like to invite the audience to raise your hand if you would like to ask a question. We have the raise hand feature. I'll call on you and ask you to unmute and speak with the panelists. I'm mindful of time, so I'm going to ask our panelists to be as brief as possible with your answers so that we can get to as many questions as possible. I've also noticed that there are some questions in the chat, and I'll make sure that I ask them on behalf of the audience member who's raised them. If we'd like to sort of start, if there's anyone who would like to raise their hand. I think I've got one. Maybe it's hard to see. Is that you, Dima, with your hand up?
Yes, actually, I just wanted to build on what you said about, the importance of, knowing the stories or owning the stories, because just wanted to add an anecdote about the book 48 Stories of Exile from Palestine. When we opened it up to the community and we're like, please bring in your stories. One of the things that I noticed is every person came in with a different focus when they shared their exile story of their parents and grandparents. However, this is one book, so I wanted to make it flow nicely together. So I went back and I created a sheet where I'm like, these questions need to be answered. Like, where were they exiled from? Who did they go with? What were their passions before they were exiled? Did they have any kind of love stories? And the most interesting thing, although they were adults, these we're talking about 25-year-olds plus, all of them came with almost, I would say, anywhere between 60 to 85% changes in their stories, because they assumed that they know the story of exile of their parents and grandparents, and they were extremely emotional about it. But when they took a minute to research and investigate and ask questions and reach out to their aunts and friends of their aunts, and how they realized actually there were so many details. And I think this is one thing that I forgot to touch upon, the importance of being authentic in terms of the details and the information that you incorporate in your story, which sets I believe stories relating to specifically Palestine apart.
Definitely. Would any other panel members like to add to that? If not, then I do have a question from our audience, and it sort of touches on what you just mentioned, Dima. I know we've been specifically centering around children today, but we have a question from the audience about storytelling being applied to adults, particularly because I guess every adult has their own inner child, and that they have these wounds, and seeing children in their community being traumatized might also be a trigger and a way of disorganizing their own healing, their own narrative. And, I've spent in presenting this topic today, I said that children, because of the absence of elders or parents, because of the genocide, they're often now moved from the role of being the ones who listen to stories. They're the ones who have to be the keeper of stories. And so even if we move beyond, child or adult, how do we sort of support people in being the keepers of their story when there's so many things, I guess, on their shoulders, whether they are adults in the community trying to protect children as well as being the ones who carry those narratives, like you said, Dima, with that truth in it. So I'd like to propose that question from the audience to the panel. Would anyone like to start?
I mean, if I may, just I'll be brief. When I worked with these 48 authors, they're not really authors. They're individuals who wanted to share their exile stories. And actually, the incredible thing is I worked with 4 editors. One was American, one was Bahraini, one was Jordanian Palestinian, and another was Syrian. And we ended up doing actually one-on-one interviews with every single contributing author to really get a sense of who these individuals are. Who are we talking about? Like when I speak about Jiddu Abdul Latif, like who is he really? And in every single session, which we initially assigned for like 30 minutes, it ended up being an hour and a half. It was truly a therapy session where the inner child came out, and every single one of them would be like, you know, I would be sitting with my teta in the kitchen, she would be cooking, and then she would start telling me the story, and every single person was getting emotional. But the trick here is, you know, emotions are important, and we have to hold on to that, and we have to remember that, and we have to relay that in what we're writing. But is equally important is the numbers. So one of the stories, a couple of stories were from the Deir Yassin massacre, and you would notice the numbers. Some would be like, you know, thousands of people were massacred. Other people were like hundreds, and some others, you know, another contributing author was like tens of people. And we had to spend a lot of time actually putting aside the emotion and trying to really preserve the truth as it is. And I think this is one thing that set this book apart, that although it's extremely emotional, we really put so much effort in educating ourselves as contributing authors to what really happened in Palestine. And I think that was the healing part. That was the part where you took control of the narrative. You went and investigated and researched and understood what it means to be in Deir Yassin, to experience that, for example, unfortunate event. I think you're muted.
Thank you, Dima. Would anyone else on the panel like to add to Dima's comments? Or I've got, I guess, a segue question if people would like to build on that.
I just want to, a quick one, that this is really us going back to what we've always been doing, right? And this goes back to what I said about moving away from the Western model of therapy, where it's very individualistic, and we've always been getting together in communities, doing what Dima guided so many people to do, but now we're making use of technology and the fact that we can, but we've always been gathering around, whether it was the fireplace or the community space or and telling our stories, right? And now we're just realizing that, you know, let's go back. I mean, the researcher in me wants to get in touch with everyone that Dima worked with and to be able to document how healing that was, because I know it is, but we've kind of moved away from that and went back to, you know, the individual and just you and just one-on-one with your therapist, and this is what you need, and the medication, and now we're like, okay, let's go back to see how, you know, we can do what we've always been doing, just bringing that back into our lives.
Yes, Asmahan, I think that's really interesting. One of the questions I had as a bit of a segue is that there are so many cultural sources of knowledge that can be drawn from and preserved through storytelling. And I think particularly when we look broadly, we have Arabic, you know, or Arab folklore and mythology. You know, we have teachings, whether that's through agricultural practices or environmental knowledge. We have historical events. We have cultural, you know, values. And I guess as storytellers, my curiosity is about what role adults have to preserve cultural knowledge and to have those authentic narratives. And I'm mindful, Alice, that you had your hand up before. So is there anything else you'd like to add to this?
Yeah, sorry, my mic glitched for a moment. I just wanted to say that basically, especially with method writing and what Khader has mentioned and everyone else has mentioned, is when you're writing from your life or from experiences that you've lived, it's not only to convey these deeper and bigger messages across, it's also to relieve some parts of you that wanted that healing and that spoke to that healing and that asked for that part. And for you, being an adult, you look back. And I started by saying, like, for me, one of the biggest experiences was the second Palestinian Intifada, having lived it through books and couldn't have processed it the way a 12-year-old child would process it. Now, looking back, I realized that I was writing a lot of diaries in that part of time. So writing does not only become basically a way of, you know, the pathological part of it or the methodological part of it, but it's also a very important tool for releasing and for talking to that inner child in you that still did not understand what happened and where they are in the world. So I think, yeah, that it is sort of like circling back and closing an open circle, if we might say so.
I think that's wonderful. You know, I feel that, you know, each of you has a different, you know, perspective here. And, you know, Alice, you've been talking about storytelling as that ethical responsibility, and Khader, you emphasized, the freedom of imagination for children. And ASMHN, we've been talking about safety and integration, and Dima, that idea of truth and voice. And I guess I'd like to propose to the panel about how do you think we need to navigate the balance between responsibility and the freedom when we're telling stories to children and helping them tell their own. How do we balance that? What would you like to maybe contribute to that in the conversation?
Sorry, Rial, I didn't hear you well.
Oh, my apologies. Thank you. I'll repeat it. I guess what I'm looking at is how do you think the role of balancing responsibility and freedom works in helping children tell their stories, and how we as adults, I guess, help form the stories around children?
You mean responsibility in what sense?
I guess responsibility around the ethical responsibility that Alice was, speaking about during, what she was presenting to us, and how ASMHN was talking about the idea of balancing safety and integration. And, Dima has been talking about, the truth, truth telling and sharing a voice, and making sure that the community has a voice. And even in yourself, you're talking about freedom and imagination. And so I'm looking at that balance of how do we hold space for that.
Yes, yeah. I really think it's integral. The responsibility comes out naturally in our stories if we truly understand the context, understand the children, their needs, their concerns, their fears, and their dreams in a very complex situation. So what I mean is that it should be the balance between those things, between the engagement, between the fun and the entertaining and the ethical part of the story. Those both sides, they combine with each other, and they strengthen each other. And it's not as simple as it seems. But I think once you write it, if your approach at the beginning is you have this great idea and this captivating idea, which is also which also resonates with the children, and especially the children that you work closely with, it all fits into pieces somehow. So to give an example, I wrote a story about, as mentioned by Alice, the program Yom Jdid, A New Day, and it talked about, it was named Rock, Scissors, Hand, Rock, Scissors, Paper. And it talks about the idea of loss. The child keeps losing to his sister in this game, and he doesn't accept the idea of loss. So it happens in a very comical situations, but at the end, because also it has an educational element, I thought of bringing on the science of probabilities into the story. So my question was, in the story, if you threw dice 8 times and the number comes odd in those 8 times, what are the chances of the 9th time being an even number? So of course it's 50, because each time you throw a dice, it's 50-50, and it's like a new beginning. But even so, he threw it the 9th time, and he still lost to his sister, which was also satirical. But he eventually learned to accept this and just enjoy the game itself. So what I mean is that I thought of like the fun part at first, but I found a way to make it ethical and educational, and also strengthen the bonds between the families. So this is how it takes shape, at least in my approach. So you start with the idea, and you shape it in a way that you bring on our responsibilities as adults, our context as storytellers, as a way to preserve our culture, our identity into the story. I hope that was a clear answer.
That was wonderful. I think that's a really great example too. I love that idea of how you take something quite playful and bring more of those layers to it. Dima, you also had something to add as well.
Just building on what Khader said, I always, as an educator, I'm not a therapist, but I always feel like it's the responsibility of the adults themselves to ensure that. And by being it our responsibility, it's truly respecting the children in terms of who they are and what they're capable of, how they're capable of thinking. So in terms of who they are, as an Arab mother, I should expose my children to Arab authored stories with characters that look like them, with characters who eat what they eat. And it's not only meatballs and spaghetti, because if my children see themselves, I love meatballs and spaghetti, but I'm just saying, if I see myself or my children they see themselves in those books, when it's time for them to write their own story, they will write their own stories with their own characters, with their homes, with their food, with their feeling it like a natural thing for them to do. My son is not going to draw a kid with blue eyes, blonde hair, walking around. Instead, he will draw himself, So that's one thing. And also respecting how children think and really taking it from imposing what they need to think, but actually teaching them how to think, and I think this is one thing in Arab literature, that we always focus on what we want them to think instead of how to think, empowering them to, think critically and ask. And that's why I love Khadir's stories and every, script he mentioned, because they are most of them are not straightforward, and most of them have like subliminal messages, and most of them are, triggering something where as an adult I'm enjoying reading this book, but at the same time it's triggering, a thought process beyond reading the actual script and following the events of the story. So I truly feel like it's always the responsibility of the adult, and inshallah by exposing our children to the right stories, they will be empowered to speak the truth freely.
That's great. I really appreciate that. And I think that leads really well into a question we have from the audience. So we have someone who has said, thank you so much for, the offering here today. And that the question is that we as a panel here today have been talking a lot about stories of things that have happened, of people themselves or of others. And the question is about a story, with what kind of role folk stories have in resistance, healing, and liberation. How do we draw from maybe folk stories or cultural narratives rather than lived experience? I'm hoping that question comes across and people are understanding. Would anyone like to start? Alice, I guess you were talking a bit about story taking. Would you like to maybe take us to start with that?
Yeah, no problem. I mean, I am not a therapist, as I might not have mentioned that, but yeah, as someone who moves between creative writing, research, and translation, I do see I'm exposed to a lot of texts. And then also, like, I realized that folk stories, because they start also from the oral tradition, they're not just old and archaic, they are actually central to the collective imagination of everyone. And they carry official things and archives. They carry what the archive erases. They carry the different characters for resistance and, I think, liberation. We're not there for liberation yet, but even if you think of the different folk characters and all of the different folk stories that we know from the general scheme of folk stories around the world, the heroines and heroes, they don't really just face power head on. They outlast it. They go in smart ways around it. They use tricks. They use the elements. There's also the use of magic. There is the use of the external powers, getting into something to resolve the situation or to turn it around and to like flip it on its own head. So it's not really accidental. You have all of these different tools that you learn from folk stories to survive, and they help you navigate the world around you. And the good thing about folk stories, if we look at the cleaned up version, because for example, the Grimm's folk tales, if you look at the old ones, they're really terrific and horrible and scary. But if you look at what we read as children and what we read as for children, it's cleaned up. So you have all of these magical fairies and fantasies and the apple and Snow White and all of these different things. So they kind of give you a block by block on how you perceive the world around you and what tools you can use effectively to get out of a very tough situation and a very difficult situation, because that's the foundation of where we realize the story pattern or the arc. And it also exposes you to different characteristics of what evil could look like. None of the evil characters in all of the folk tales around the world are one type. They are different. They have different sources. And so is good, and so is the endings and the solution to these stories, which also creates a feeling of how diverse is the world. And if, as much as I can, I've lived an experience or it's hurt me some way, or I'm in a dark place, there are so many ways to get out of there by using all of these different tools. And sometimes then also think about it, when you're a kid, like everything becomes magical. Even your grandma's closet that's only filled with, I don't know, sugar and cigarettes is a magical space for you to explore. The sense of wonder starts essentially with a lot of folk stories, and because they're moved from one generation to the other, they also preserve identity. Specifically with a lot of like the Palestinian folk stories, they preserve a lot of the identity without realizing. Like one of the most important and well-known Palestinian folk stories is Bene. It's basically a story of a girl that is kidnapped, and then she sends words to her parents and to her like village to come save her through multiple ways, like with the birds, with the passing by shepherd, with all of these different things. So if you think of it in a Palestinian context, it could be someone who's in prison or in house arrest or in space that they cannot exit, but they use all of these external motives to try to get out of the situation. So yeah, I think if you go back to the folk tales, they're the foundation. And honestly, like with the world and globalization and everything, even the new things are becoming modern classics. Like think of things that have been written 20 years ago and they're more recent. They're becoming like the folk tales that we were used to listen to as kids. So I think it all like makes building blocks, if that makes sense.
That's great. Would anyone like to add to that? I've got a bit of a segue.
I just want to add very quickly. Thank you, Alice. She answered it completely. But I just want to say, in terms of the therapeutic aspect of it, other than it's, I don't know, helping us metabolize, like Alice was saying, like kind of make sense of all of these stories in one. So we're helping the child rehearse liberation and rehearse a future where they're doing something, they're active. You get to live it. And if you really want, I mean, maybe for a lot of us, we won't live to see the day, or hopefully we will, but we want the children to feel like that you have a role to play. And rehearsing it in our mind, I think, is one way that we pass on these stories. And essentially, these have been passed on with words in these community spaces. I remember one thing I advised a few of the community members that were working directly with the children. I said, when you go from one group of child to another, tell them that, hey, yesterday I told another group of children the story that you came up with. And you would just see them light up. And what did they say? And what did they think? And they loved it. Let me tell you their story. And just starting off new folklore stories coming right from children. And this is where it really comes to life. And I think just that one phrase of, I told your story to another group, already made them feel the impact of just, I created something that other people heard. And imagine the hope and the prospects that this gives to one child who will turn into an adult, hopefully, one day. So that's what I wanted to add.
No, that's beautiful. And you've got some really lovely reactions to that in the chat here, Asmahan. But the idea of rehearsing liberation, I think, leads me to perhaps the last question. or maybe a combination of some themes, and then we'll wrap up with a call to action. But that idea of maybe children healing children. This question I have is, if we think about the current context, particularly for children in Palestine, children in Lebanon, in the parts of Southwest Asia, when we think about this current context as panelists, what do you believe storytelling is actually doing for children in the communities right now? When we see it on the ground, when we see it actually happening in real life, what do you think its role is doing? When do you see the impact of storytelling? Because I'd love that to move into our call to action as our final comment or question for the night.
I can only talk about my experience when we read the book من بلد اسمه فلسطين to children in Gaza in 2021, 2022, and so on. And again, I think the power, we should not underestimate, using resources that reflect the realities of these children, how they look like. Even the book, for example, about the body safety, we had this huge NGO wanting to buy thousands of copies of this book because it's important and it helps. And I actually refused to sell them that book because I'm like, that's not the reality of refugees in Jordan. They do not live in homes that are big, that have, multiple washrooms. No, they are living in spaces that are overcrowded. They are in classrooms that are overcrowded. Everything I'm saying in this book may be relevant at a level, but not on the authentic, genuine level. When you're a refugee and you have to sacrifice certain things, when you're living in a tent, body safety rules, the way I say them, do not apply to this book the way they apply, again, to a child who is living in a city with, under a roof, with no genocide, with no war, there's no conflict. So I think as professionals, using certain resources, and I love that Asmahan is so conscious of that, making sure that the resources we are using are reflective on a level of illustrations, in the level of the content, and also the messaging, because guilt is a huge thing that happens, through literature and in therapy, where we have very high expectations, of from parents, from children to handle certain things when the reality itself does not allow them, to practice these, proper, or let's say modern, whether it's a pedagogy in a classroom or at home in terms of parenting and so on. So I do believe, again, it's the responsibility of the professional or the author or the parent towards the children.
Wonderful. Thank you, Dima. Would anyone else like to contribute to that comment or add on what Dima's said here in the panel?
Yeah, I'll jump on from that. I mean, if Dima professed anything, and Asmahan as well, is like also awareness to the audience that you're writing for. Awareness of the audience that you're writing for like helps shape the text. And also as writers and as creators in the space, as Khader has also mentioned as well, like we want to jump off the page and have these crazy ideas. And for me, and I think for a lot of people who write with experimentation, both ways work. Both of them work. If you're accurate to the lived experience is something, and if you're jumping and having like flying kites and stuff, that's another thing. For example, recently I've worked with children in one of the reading engagement programs on a book that was dedicated to one of the martyrs who had died because of drones that were attached to kites. And those children were based in areas that they've never seen kites. They're like very young children, so they hadn't seen kites ever. So we used the concept of kites to as a space for it to jump off and to have freedom. And we were always saying, what does it look like? How do you imagine it? Building upon the physical book that we were reading, that there is some sort of connection to the sky and to freedom and to the open space. So if you think of how literature has worked and continues to work, even in the most bizarre of works, you will find something relevant, even if you had not lived that experience, because the way literature makes you feel, I think, is the way that determines how much you feel for that book, or how much you like the book. I mean, for example, look at high fantasy and fantasy as in literature. None of it exists, and still you have millions of children who love the Harry Potter series, the Lord of the Rings series. I mean, all of these things that are purely imaginative. At the same time, we still have as adults, as responsible adults, also be wary of the children that we're writing for. And that was one of the things that I was consciously aware of. I spoke about the New Day or Yom Jadid, that I was writing to children who had lost literally everything. So I was questioning, like, can I use like the television? In one of the episodes I wrote, it was about like the electricity cutting off and how scary that would be, and like using a candle to replace, cut off electricity. And I was thinking, like, how privileged am I to write this? And I feel guilty writing about that. But then I realized children have experienced a power out. They know what electricity is. If that's not the main thing that I'm centering the whole thing about, it's just a secondary act that they will read on and then just move with the rest of the story. So the rest of it has to be built well enough for them to like handle that hiccup that happened upon the way, because eventually you can't have just a pink brush and color the word pink and that's it. They are exposed to real life and real dangers and real risks and real situations that are not pleasant, unfortunately, in a lot of places in the world, not just Palestine, that's across the globe. So it's important to also speak to their fears and not just like pink wash and whitewash everything and make it look like a perfect world for them. It has to be relatable, I think. And that's, I think, what Khadr started with. Like, it has to be somehow relatable for you.
Wonderful. And I do think that relatability is important. And what I'm hearing is from these last few comments from the panel, I think this is actually a really good time, because I am mindful of our actual real time of our discussion today, to sort of first thank you all for coming today. I particularly want to thank and name our panelists, Dima Al-Alami, Alice Youssef, Asmahan Saleh Khalil, and Khadr Salameh, for your really robust discussion. I'm going to invite each of you, I'm going to set you a really tough time, maybe 30 seconds to 45 seconds. If you could give your final comments or call to action, and then I'd like to do a bit of a closing for our audience. So if I could please ask each of you to just give your final 30-second, 45-second call to action, please. Thank you so much.
I'll start. If I were to sum up one call to action to everyone here from whatever walks of life, is to really approach things with curiosity, especially when we're talking to children, because they hold a vast amount of possibilities, whereas we as adults might have narrowed down our expectations and our stories. They come to us with a lot of possibilities, and it's up to us to remain curious, to help them remain curious about their stories and about the sense of meaning that they're making out of everything. So curiosity, I think, if I were to sum it up very quickly, is the call to action I would give everyone.
I'll go next. I think it's just a reminder that we are all born as storytellers, but in times like these, like, storytelling is resistance, and it's our responsibility. If we are unable to do it ourselves, at least empower our patients, our clients, our, who we work with, to, find their voice and speak up and write, because I truly believe that every single one of us is a storyteller.
I'll also jump off Dima's work. I mean, as I've tried to mention within the discussion, stories are anchoring and also freeing. So if we can always recognize this duality within us, that it helps root us, and it also helps us spread our ranges. So if we always engage with reading and with writing, and never to forget that reading is part of writing, and writing feeds into reading, and like oral traditions feed into that. So none of it is in isolation, as we all are never in isolation. We're all within the bigger circle of things. Thank you.
Okay, I want to say something about the idea of storytelling itself, how much it is powerful to change the world and to change things. I mean, there is the happening itself and the story that transfers it. And in a way, it's really vital how we understand and how we reflect and how we process this incident that happened in reality through storytelling. So it's a very powerful tool that I invite everyone to think about more, because each one of us, even in our identity, even how we introduce ourselves, has a story in his mind about himself. So it's really into, like, it's found in so many things, the idea of storytelling.
I really appreciate these final words from everyone. I think they complement each other so well. And I'm hoping you as an audience have enjoyed the evening. I want to thank you for your engagement in this really important topic. I think the questions in the chat have really helped add to this meaningful dialogue and really, I think, added some further actions that maybe our community can take for storytelling practices and collective resistance. Just a reminder that our discussion has been recorded and the links to the recordings will be made available in the coming days. I'm also going to be sending out a brief survey via email to everyone who registered, seeking your feedback for today, as well as providing you some pathways on how you can follow up with our panelists with their different work, and as well as maybe some calls to action. I'd really like to keep the conversation going. I think there are more stories to tell. And please continue to engage with the Australia-Palestine Mental Health Network on the Substack and our social media channels and through our future actions and events. And I guess myself as host, I'd like to offer a final reflection, and I'd like to perhaps leave you with this. If we don't tell our stories, they will be told for us. When we do tell them, we shape what gets to come next. So I invite you all, on behalf of our panelists and to the audience, to create space for a story. Whether that's asking a child a question and listening deeply, whether it's sharing a memory from your family or writing down something you've never said before. Because stories don't survive by being perfect or having, the right words. They survive just by being told. And I think it's so important that we see them as the thread that makes new things possible. So I'd like to thank you, and I wish you all a very good night.